In the heart of London, where history and modernity blend seamlessly, Buckingham Palace stood as a symbol of tradition and grandeur. The palace, with its golden gates and towering architecture, attracted thousands of visitors every day. Among these tourists was Alex, a young traveler from another country who had always dreamed of exploring the wonders of England. With his camera slung around his neck and a map in hand, he wandered through the streets of London, soaking in the sights and sounds of the bustling city. On this particular morning, Alex joined a large group of tourists gathered outside Buckingham Palace to witness the iconic changing of the guard ceremony. The air buzzed with excitement as people jostled for the best view. Families snapped photos, children pointed excitedly at the guards, and couples posed for pictures against the backdrop of the palace. Everyone seemed eager to catch a glimpse of the famous red-coated soldiers with their tall bearskin hats, standing so still they almost looked like statues. Alex found himself fascinated by the scene, but also slightly amused. He had heard stories about how the royal guards were trained not to react to anything, no matter how strange or provocative. This intrigued him, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was really true. As the ceremony began, the guards marched in perfect formation, their movements precise and synchronized. The band played cheerful tunes, adding a lively rhythm to the event. Tourists clapped and cheered, marveling at the spectacle before them. But while most people admired the guards' discipline, Alex felt a mischievous curiosity bubbling inside him. He leaned over to a fellow tourist standing next to him and joked, "Do you think they'd blink if we threw something at them?" The other person laughed nervously, but didn't respond. Alex shrugged it off and turned his attention back to the guards. One of them, positioned closer to the crowd, caught his eye. The guard stood perfectly still, his expression blank, his eyes fixed ahead. Feeling emboldened, Alex decided to test the guard's composure. At first, he started small, making silly faces, waving his hands wildly, and even mimicking the guard's stance. Some nearby tourists chuckled, finding his antics entertaining. Others shot him disapproving looks, silently urging him to stop. But Alex didn't notice, or perhaps he didn't care. Encouraged by the lack of reaction from the guard, he grew bolder. He stepped closer to the barrier separating the crowd from the guards, his mind racing with ideas. The guard remained motionless, as though carved from stone. This only fueled Alex's determination to provoke some kind of response. Without thinking twice, he reached out impulsively, his fingers brushing against the shiny metal pinned to the guard's chest. For a split second, there was silence. Then, with a sudden tug, Alex yanked the metal free. The crowd gasped in unison, their laughter replaced by stunned silence. The metal clattered to the ground, its metallic gleam catching the sunlight. Alex froze, realizing what he had just done. His initial smirk faltered as he looked around at the shocked faces surrounding him. The guard, still standing rigidly, gave no sign of emotion, but the mood in the area shifted dramatically. What had started as a playful prank had crossed an invisible line, and Alex was about to learn that actions have consequences, even when you're on vacation. As the shiny metal hit the ground with a metallic clink, time seemed to freeze for a moment. The once cheerful atmosphere turned tense and heavy, like storm clouds rolling in to overshadow a bright day. Tourists who had been laughing and chatting just moments ago now stood frozen, their eyes darting between Alex, the guard, and the fallen metal. Some whispered nervously, while others simply stared in disbelief. It was as if everyone collectively held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Alex, still standing near the barrier, felt a wave of unease wash over him. His earlier confidence wavered, replaced by a gnawing sense that he might have gone too far. He glanced around at the crowd, hoping for someone, anyone, to laugh or shrug it off as part of the fun. But instead, he found only disapproving stares and furrowed brows. A woman clutching her child's hand shook her head in disgust, muttering something under her breath about respect. An older man nearby crossed his arms and muttered loudly, "That's not okay. Not even close." The guard, meanwhile, remained eerily still, as though nothing had happened. His face betrayed no emotion, but the significance of the moment wasn't lost on anyone watching. To those familiar with British traditions, the medal wasn't just a piece of metal. It represented years of dedication, sacrifice, and service. Each one told a story of hard work and loyalty, earned through countless hours of training and duty. By tearing it off, Alex hadn't just disrupted the ceremony. He had insulted everything it stood for. But Alex didn't seem to grasp this immediately. At first, he tried to play it off, forcing a nervous laugh and holding up his hands defensively. "Hey, relax," he said, addressing no one in particular. "It's just a joke. I'll give it back." He bent down awkwardly to pick up the medal, but before he could reach it, two additional guards appeared out of nowhere, moving swiftly toward him. Their boots clicked against the pavement, cutting through the silence like sharp knives. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for the approaching officers. Unlike the original guard, these men carried an air of authority, their expressions stern and focused. They positioned themselves on either side of Alex, forming an unspoken barrier between him and the rest of the group. One of them gestured firmly for Alex to step back from the barrier, his voice calm but commanding. "Sir, please come with us," he said, leaving no room for argument. Alex hesitated, his mind racing. He looked around again, searching for support or understanding, but all he saw were cameras pointed directly at him. Phones were held high, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. People whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disappointment, while others recorded videos to share online later. The realization hit Alex like a ton of bricks. This wasn't going away anytime soon. What started as a reckless prank had spiraled into something much bigger than he ever imagined. Despite the growing tension, Alex attempted to explain himself. "I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered, his voice tinged with panic. "It was just, a dumb joke. No harm done, right?" But his words fell flat, drowned out by the weight of the situation. The guards exchanged brief glances, silently communicating with each other before one of them stepped forward and firmly took hold of Alex's arm. "Sir, we need to discuss this further," the officer said, his tone firm yet professional. There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet resolve that left no doubt about what was coming next. As they led Alex away from the crowd, the tourists began murmuring again, their voices a mix of shock, outrage, and curiosity. Some sympathized with the guards, expressing admiration for their composure despite the provocation. Others criticized Alex, calling him disrespectful and selfish. And a few couldn't help but wonder how such a simple act of mischief could escalate so quickly. By the time Alex disappeared behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, escorted by the officers, the crowd had already begun dispersing. But the memory of what had happened lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the thin line between harmless fun and crossing boundaries. Little did Alex know, his actions were about to spark a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the palace grounds, and change the way people thought about respect, tradition, and accountability. The moment Alex was led away from the crowd, a profound sense of unease settled over him. The playful smirk he had worn just minutes earlier was now replaced by a look of wide-eyed anxiety. Surrounded by the two stern officers, he felt small and out of place, like a child caught doing something they weren't supposed to. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace, which had seemed so awe-inspiring earlier, now loomed over him like an unyielding judge. Every step he took echoed loudly in his ears, each click of his shoes against the pavement reminding him of the gravity of the situation. As they moved through the gates and into a quieter area near the palace grounds, Alex tried to reason with the guards. "Look, I really didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It was just a stupid joke. Honest mistake, But the officers remained silent, their expressions unreadable. They didn't argue or scold him. Instead, they simply guided him forward with quiet authority. Their silence was somehow worse than anger. It made Alex feel even more isolated, as if he were being judged without a chance to defend himself. Once inside a secure office within the palace complex, Alex was asked to sit down. The room was plain but formal, with wooden furniture and framed portraits of past monarchs adorning the walls. A senior officer entered shortly after, his presence commanding respect. He introduced himself as Inspector Harris and wasted no time getting to the point. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. Alex opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he nodded weakly, avoiding eye contact. Inspector Harris proceeded to explain why Alex's actions were far more serious than a mere prank. "Those medals aren't just decorations," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Each one represents years of service, sacrifice, and dedication. When you tore that medal off, you disrespected not only the guard wearing it, but also everything he stands for." Alex swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words press down on him. For the first time, he began to grasp the deeper meaning behind the shiny emblem he had so carelessly removed. But the conversation didn't end there. The inspector went on to describe how incidents like this could undermine public trust in institutions like the Royal Guards. "People come here to witness tradition and history," he explained. "When someone disrupts that, it sends a message that these symbols don't matter, and that's dangerous." Alex listened intently, his earlier bravado completely gone. He realized that his actions hadn't just affected one person. They had touched something much bigger than himself. Meanwhile, outside the palace, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Tourists who had witnessed the scene shared videos and photos on social media platforms, tagging friends and sparking heated discussions. Comments flooded in from all corners of the globe. Some defended Alex, suggesting he might not have understood the cultural significance of the medal. Others condemned him harshly, calling him reckless and disrespectful. Hashtags like #RespectTradition and #RoyalGuardIncident began trending, drawing attention to the story. Back in the office, Alex was informed that the matter would be handed over to local law enforcement. "This isn't something we can overlook," Inspector Harris said, his voice calm but resolute. "You'll need to answer for your actions." As the reality of the situation sank in, Alex felt a mix of emotions: regret, fear, and embarrassment. He thought about his family back home, imagining how they would react when they heard about what had happened. Would they be disappointed, ashamed, angry? Before leaving the palace grounds, Alex was given a chance to retrieve the medal, which had been carefully picked up and preserved by one of the guards. Holding it in his hands, he examined it closely for the first time. It was heavier than he expected, its surface etched with intricate designs that spoke of craftsmanship and pride. For a brief moment, he felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost brought tears to his eyes. This wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of honor, earned through years of hard work and commitment. As the officers escorted him to a waiting police vehicle, Alex couldn't help but glance back at Buckingham Palace one last time. Its towering structure seemed to stand as a silent witness to his folly, a reminder of the line he had crossed. Little did he know, the consequences of his actions were only beginning to unfold. What awaited him next would test not only his understanding of right and wrong, but also his ability to face accountability for the choices he had made. The ride to the police station was quiet, but inside Alex's mind, chaos reigned. Sitting in the back seat of the police car, he stared out the window as London's iconic streets blurred past. The bright lights and bustling crowds that had once seemed so exciting now felt distant and cold. His hands fidgeted nervously, gripping the edges of the seat as if trying to hold on to some semblance of control. He replayed the events of the day over and over in his head, each memory making him cringe a little more. How had it all gone so wrong? When they arrived at the station, Alex was led into a small, brightly lit room with plain white walls and a single table in the center. It felt sterile and impersonal, adding to his growing sense of unease. A detective introduced himself as Officer Thompson and began asking questions. "Can you explain what happened today?" he asked, his tone calm but probing. Alex hesitated before speaking, struggling to find the right words. It started as a joke," Alex finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think it was a big deal. I've seen videos online where people try to get reactions from guards, and nothing ever happens. I thought it would be funny." Officer Thompson listened patiently, jotting down notes as Alex spoke. But when Alex mentioned the medal, the detective's expression hardened slightly. "You understand that those medals aren't just decorations, right?" Officer Thompson asked, leaning forward. "They're awarded for years of service and dedication. They represent honor and respect, not just for the individual wearing them, but for the institution they serve." Alex nodded slowly, the weight of his actions sinking in deeper with every word. He realized now that he hadn't just disrespected one person. He had insulted an entire tradition. The investigation continued, with officers reviewing footage from the scene and interviewing witnesses. Tourists who had been present during the incident were eager to share their accounts, many expressing shock and disappointment at Alex's behavior. Some described him as immature and disrespectful, while others called his actions unforgivable. Social media posts about the incident were also brought up, showing how quickly the story had spread online. Videos of Alex tearing off the medal had already racked up millions of views, accompanied by heated debates about cultural sensitivity and accountability. As the hours passed, Alex grew increasingly anxious. He kept thinking about the headlines he might see the next morning. "Tourist humiliates royal guard," or worse, "disrespecting tradition. A lesson for all." The thought made his stomach churn. He knew there was no taking it back. His face was out there for the world to judge, and the court of public opinion wasn't known for its mercy. Eventually, the officers informed Alex that formal charges would be filed against him. These included theft, for removing the medal, public disorder, for disrupting the ceremony, and contempt of official duties, for mocking the guard. Hearing the list of charges left Alex stunned. He had never imagined that a momentary lapse in judgment could lead to something so serious. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice trembling. Officer Thompson explained that the case would go to court, where a judge would decide the appropriate punishment. Until then, Alex was released on bail, but not without strict conditions. He was forbidden from returning to Buckingham Palace or any similar historic sites, and he had to surrender his passport to ensure he wouldn't leave the country before the trial. As Alex stepped out of the police station, the cool night air hit him like a slap. Reporters swarmed around him, shoving microphones in his face and shouting questions. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing his embarrassed expression for the world to see. Back at his hotel later that evening, Alex sat alone in his room, staring blankly at the wall. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but he didn't dare look at them. He knew what he'd find: angry messages, critical comments, and endless reminders of the mess he had created. For the first time in his life, he truly understood the power of consequences. What had started as a careless prank had spiraled into something far greater than himself, and now he had to face the fallout. As he lay awake that night, sleep eluded him. All he could think about was the courtroom, the judge, and the uncertain future that awaited him. By the time Alex woke up the next morning, his actions had become global news. Headlines about the medal-snatching tourist dominated newspapers, websites, and television broadcasts. Social media platforms were ablaze with reactions, memes, and debates. Videos of the incident were shared millions of times, with captions like, "When fun goes too far," or "Tourist learns respect the hard way." Comment sections exploded with opinions, some sympathetic, most scathing. People around the world weighed in, turning Alex's personal mistake into a public spectacle. At first glance, the responses seemed divided. A small group argued that Alex might have been unaware of the cultural significance of the medal. Maybe he didn't know. One commenter wrote, "Not everyone understands these traditions." Others pointed out that ignorance wasn't an excuse. "You don't have to be British to know you shouldn't mess with someone's uniform," another replied sharply. The majority, however, sided firmly against Alex, criticizing him for what they saw as blatant disrespect. Veterans and members of the military were especially vocal, sharing their own stories about earning medals and badges through years of hard work and sacrifice. To them, Alex's act felt like a slap in the face, a mockery of everything they had dedicated their lives to. As the days passed, the backlash intensified. News outlets dug deeper into Alex's background, uncovering details about his life back home. His photo appeared on every major network, along with interviews from neighbors who described him as outgoing, but a bit reckless. Some even speculated that this wasn't the first time he'd crossed boundaries while traveling. One online forum jokingly nicknamed him the prankster tourist, though few found humor in the situation anymore. Even travel influencers and bloggers joined the conversation, using Alex's story as a cautionary tale. They reminded their followers to always research local customs before visiting new places, emphasizing that respect is universal, even if traditions differ. Amidst all the noise, Alex struggled to process the tidal wave of criticism. Back at his hotel, he avoided looking at his phone or turning on the TV, knowing full well what awaited him. But it was impossible to escape. Every time he stepped outside, strangers recognized him. Some glared silently, shaking their heads in disapproval. Others stopped him to lecture him directly. "Do you realize how much trouble you've caused?" One man snapped during a grocery run. Alex mumbled apologies and hurried away, his cheeks burning with shame. What hit him hardest, though, were the messages from people he knew. Friends and family reached out, some offering support, others expressing disappointment. His parents called late one night, their voices filled with a mix of anger and concern. "We raised you better than this," his mother said, her tone heavy with sadness. "How could you let something so silly ruin your trip?" And maybe more. Her words stung deeply, forcing Alex to confront the reality of his choices. For the first time, he began to see himself not just as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who had made a serious error in judgment. Meanwhile, discussions about accountability spread beyond social media. Talk shows invited experts to weigh in on the incident, debating whether Alex deserved forgiveness or punishment. Some suggested that education, not jail time, should be the focus, arguing that travelers need clearer guidance on respecting local customs. Others insisted that leniency would send the wrong message, advocating for strict consequences to deter similar behavior in the future. Even schools started incorporating Alex's story into lessons about cultural awareness, warning students about the dangers of underestimating the impact of their actions abroad. As the trial date approached, Alex found himself caught between two worlds, the one where he was a regular person trying to enjoy his vacation, and the other where he was a symbol of recklessness and disrespect. He spent hours reflecting on his behavior, replaying the moment when he tore off the medal, and wondering what had possessed him to do something so thoughtless. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand that his actions weren't just about him. They represented a broader issue of entitlement and disregard for tradition. Though the court hadn't yet decided his fate, Alex already felt the weight of his punishment. Public shaming, isolation, and guilt had taken their toll, leaving him emotionally drained. Yet despite everything, he couldn't shake the feeling that this experience might teach him something valuable, if only he could survive the storm long enough to learn from it. The day of the trial arrived, and Alex walked into the courtroom with a mix of dread and resignation. Gone was the carefree tourist who had once laughed at his own antics. In his place stood a man visibly shaken, dressed in neat but simple attire, clutching a folder containing notes he hoped would help him explain himself. The room buzzed with anticipation as reporters, spectators, and even a few veterans gathered to witness the proceedings. Cameras clicked outside the courthouse, capturing every step Alex took, while inside, all eyes were fixed on him. As the judge entered and took their seat, the atmosphere grew tense. The prosecutor began by laying out the case against Alex, emphasizing not just the theft of the medal, but also the disruption caused during a ceremonial event that symbolized national pride. This isn't merely about a stolen item, they argued passionately. It's about disrespecting an institution steeped in history, tradition, and honor. They showed footage of the incident, pausing at key moments to highlight Alex's behavior, the smirk, the tug, the gasps from the crowd. Each frame seemed to drive home the gravity of what had happened, leaving Alex feeling smaller with every second. Defense lawyers countered by portraying Alex as someone who hadn't fully understood the cultural weight of his actions. "My client is young and impulsive," one lawyer said, gesturing toward Alex. "He admits his mistake and deeply regrets it." This was never meant to be malicious. It was ignorance, plain and simple. They called for leniency, arguing that punishing Alex too harshly wouldn't undo the harm done, but could instead serve as a learning opportunity for others. Witnesses were then called to testify. A veteran who had earned multiple medals recounted the sacrifices required to receive such honors, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "These aren't trinkets you can play with," he told the court. "They represent years of service, discipline, and sometimes loss. To disrespect them is to dishonor everyone who has worn them." Another witness, a Buckingham Palace guard present during the incident, described how Alex's actions disrupted the solemnity of the ceremony and affected morale among his colleagues. His testimony painted a vivid picture of professionalism clashing with recklessness. When it came time for Alex to speak, he stood nervously, gripping the edge of the podium. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced himself to look up, meeting the gaze of the judge. "I want to apologize to the guard, to the royal family, and to everyone watching this today," he began haltingly. "What I did was wrong, and I didn't realize how serious it was until it was too late. I thought it was harmless fun, but now I see how disrespectful it truly was. If I could go back and change things, I would." His voice cracked as he continued, tears welling in his eyes. "I've learned so much these past weeks about traditions, respect, and responsibility. I promise I'll spend the rest of my life making sure something like this never happens again." For a moment, the courtroom fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. After deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. Alex was found guilty on all charges but spared jail time due to his remorse and willingness to accept responsibility. Instead, he received a hefty fine, mandatory community service cleaning monuments across London, and a lifetime ban from entering the United Kingdom. Additionally, he was ordered to write letters of apology to each member of the Royal Guard present that day. Though relieved to avoid prison, Alex knew the real punishment lay in the public humiliation and lifelong consequences of his actions. As he left the courthouse surrounded by flashing cameras, he realized this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a journey toward redemption. Years passed, and Alex's life changed in ways he could never have imagined. That chaotic day outside Buckingham Palace, the immediate aftermath of the trial, had been brutal. His face plastered across newspapers, his name synonymous with recklessness, and his reputation tarnished beyond repair. For months, he avoided social gatherings, dreading the inevitable questions or sideways glances from acquaintances who recognized him. But as time went on, the world moved forward, and so did Alex. Yet the lessons from his mistakes stayed with him, shaping the person he became. Alex began serving his community service sentence by cleaning monuments around London, a task that initially felt humiliating, but eventually gave him a strange sense of purpose. Every morning, armed with a bucket and scrub brush, he worked quietly alongside others assigned to similar duties. At first, passers-by would stop to stare or whisper, pointing out the medal guide to their friends. Some even snapped photos, much to Alex's discomfort. But over time, something unexpected happened. People started talking to him. Tourists asked why he was there. Locals shared stories about the monuments, and veterans occasionally stopped by to thank him for taking care of the sites. These interactions forced Alex to confront his past head-on. and slowly they helped him understand the importance of preserving history and respecting traditions. Writing the apology letters to the royal guards proved equally challenging. Each letter required Alex to reflect deeply on what he'd done, forcing him to articulate not just an apology, but also his newfound understanding of respect and accountability. He poured hours into crafting sincere messages, ensuring each one conveyed genuine remorse. To his surprise, some of the guards responded, not with anger, but with forgiveness. One wrote back simply saying, "We all make mistakes. Use this experience wisely." Those words stuck with Alex, becoming a mantra that guided him through difficult moments. Back home, after completing his sentence, Alex struggled to reintegrate into normal life. Friends invited him to parties, but he declined, no longer interested in reckless behavior. Instead, he threw himself into volunteering at local museums and historical societies, eager to give back in any way he could. His passion caught the attention of a travel blogger who interviewed him about his experiences. During the conversation, Alex opened up about his journey, admitting how naive he had been and urging travelers to approach new cultures with humility and respect. The blog post went viral, sparking discussions worldwide about responsible tourism and cultural sensitivity. Over time, Alex's story transformed from a cautionary tale into a lesson in redemption. Schools and organizations invited him to speak about his experience, using it as a teaching moment for students and travelers alike. Standing before crowds, he recounted every detail: the prank, the arrest, the trial, and the aftermath, without sugarcoating anything. "I thought I was being funny," he often said, "but my actions hurt people who dedicate their lives to serving others." Don't let curiosity or arrogance blind you to the impact your choices can have. Though the lifetime ban from the UK weighed heavily on him, Alex accepted it as part of his penance. He dreamed of returning someday, not as a tourist seeking thrills, but as someone humbled and respectful enough to appreciate its rich heritage properly. In the meantime, he channeled his regret into meaningful action, working tirelessly to ensure no one else repeated his mistakes. By the time years turned into a decade, Alex had built a quiet yet fulfilling life centered on learning, growth, and giving back. The once carefree traveler had become a thoughtful advocate for cultural awareness, earning admiration from those who knew his full story. Though he carried the scars of his past, they no longer defined him. They reminded him of how far he'd come. And though he wished he could erase that fateful day, he knew it had shaped him into someone better. Sometimes, he thought, our greatest failures teach us our most valuable lessons. Years later, Alex sat in a small cafe in his hometown, sipping coffee and watching the world go by outside the window. The once young traveler was now older, wiser, and more reflective. His hair had thinned slightly, and faint lines marked the corners of his eyes, signs of both age and experience. Across the table sat a journalist who had tracked him down for an interview. It wasn't the first time someone had approached him about his infamous past, but this conversation felt different. Instead of focusing on the scandal itself, the journalist wanted to know how Alex had changed since that fateful day. "I'm not proud of what I did," Alex began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "At the time, I thought it was harmless fun, a way to break the monotony of being a tourist. But looking back, I see how selfish and ignorant I was." He paused, staring into his coffee cup as though searching for the right words. "It took losing everything, my freedom, my reputation, even my sense of identity, to realize that actions have consequences, and when you disrespect something sacred to others, you're not just hurting them, you're hurting yourself." The journalist nodded, scribbling notes before asking, "Do you think people understand your story? Do they learn from it?" Alex leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. "I hope so," he replied. "At first, I thought the backlash was unfair, like the world was piling on me for one stupid mistake. But over time, I realized it wasn't just about me. My actions became a symbol of something bigger, the importance of respecting boundaries, traditions, and institutions. People use my story to remind themselves, and others, that cultural sensitivity isn't optional. It's essential. He went on to describe how his life had shifted after the incident. No longer drawn to reckless adventures, Alex found fulfillment in quieter pursuits. He volunteered at museums, helped organize educational programs for travelers, and even wrote articles offering tips on responsible tourism. His efforts earned him a modest following online, where fans praised him for turning his failure into a force for good. "I'll never undo what happened," he admitted, "but if sharing my story stops someone else from making the same mistake, then maybe it was worth it." As the interview wrapped up, the journalist asked one final question. If you could go back to that day, what would you tell your younger self? Alex smiled faintly, his gaze drifting toward the window. "I'd tell him to slow down, to think before acting. I'd remind him that respect isn't just about following rules. It's about understanding the value of what other people hold dear. And I'd warn him that humor can sometimes hurt more than it entertains." The article based on their conversation went viral, reigniting interest in Alex's journey. This time, however, the tone was different. Readers marveled at how far he'd come, praising his honesty and willingness to grow. Travel agencies included excerpts from the piece in their orientation materials, using Alex's story as a real-life example of why mindfulness matters abroad. Teachers incorporated it into lessons on accountability, while families discussed it around dinner tables, debating whether redemption was possible after such a public misstep. For Alex, the renewed attention brought mixed emotions. On one hand, he appreciated the chance to share his message with a wider audience. On the other, he longed for anonymity, the quiet life he built away from the spotlight. Still, he couldn't deny the impact his story had made. Governments referenced it in campaigns promoting respectful tourism, and organizations highlighted it during workshops on cultural awareness. Even Buckingham Palace indirectly acknowledged its influence, releasing statements urging visitors to honor traditions while enjoying historic sites. In the end, Alex's tale became more than just a cautionary story. It evolved into a universal lesson about humility, growth, and second chances. Though he would always carry the weight of his past, he wore it like a badge of transformation, proof that even the most reckless souls can find redemption. As he often reminded audiences during talks, respect isn't something you earn overnight. It's something you give freely, without expecting anything in return. And once you lose it, earning it back takes work, but it's worth every effort. And so, the story of the tourist who tore off a medal from a royal guard lived on, not as a punchline or a scandal, but as a powerful reminder of the choices we make and the legacies we leave behind.